Do you like freedom? And will you join us? Do you want to find the lost city of Atlantis? Well, hang in there, bud. Because together we're gonna find it here at TekWars 2.0. Well, here at TekWars 2.0. The lost ancient cities of your ancestors' past will be brought to the horizon of our surface-level panopticon. Boof and Warren won't do you wrong. You can break the cuffs just like I did here at TekWars 2.0. Here at TekWars 2.0. Here at TekWars 2.0. TekWars 2.0.
Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of TekWars 2.0. I'm here without my co-host John, but with a very special guest who goes by the name Mike the Ruler. So Mike, welcome to the TekWars studio. This is actually the first in-studio guest we've had on TekWars 2.0, and I'm very glad to have you here. Thank you for coming on. And Mike, how are we doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing pretty well, honestly. I'm trying to do everything I can do, even under whatever circumstances, New York City government has put in. I've been doing a lot of calisthenics. I've been going on 30-mile plus bike rides and really trying to just stay as fit as possible, get ready for the zombie apocalypse, and also just keep myself engaged and motivated as much as I can with limited, social interaction by my own choice or not.
Sounds healthy. No, thanks for coming on. We've actually, the audience might not know this, but we go way back, way back to the early 2010s. It's like a millennia from now, but really it's not been that long, but it feels like it's been forever that I've known you. And I'm glad that we're finally having this little show to do together, and your first interview in quite a while. So I'm excited to get into some topics. We're going to be talking about fashion, the false economy that's propping up what people see as real economy that just gets downplayed by quantitative easing through the Federal Reserve over and over again. And we're going to get into the aspects that correspond from real estate to fashion and the many topics around such things. So Mike, maybe we can start with who you are for the listeners, and what has changed from maybe the people that knew you originally from back in the day. Let's get a lowdown on Mike the Ruler.
All right. So I'm 19 years old. I work in the fashion industry. I was working as a consultant full time. I was living in London last year, and I was working for kind of a corporate company that managed a lot of fashion brands and it had this very peculiar, angle where they said, oh, we're about we want to support creativity and authenticity and all these things, when they would take these young designers and give them some sort of contract to either this company I work for, they would manage the wholesale, so they would run the business and say, okay, we want you to sell to these stores, we're gonna run your showroom for you, we're gonna help you make money. That was the angle they came on, and we take a small cut. Or they would take a large investment and view these companies as a long-term investment and want to grow them as a business. So what would happen is it would just turn into everything solely for scaling the business and just growth. It's this stupid meme you have in the fashion world right now, where the only concern is growth. It's just typical late stage bullshit, honestly. I mean, there's not much more to say in the most literal sense, but where I worked in the company was kind of this other part, that it was the consulting side of the company. So I worked as a consultant, and I think they kind of wanted to tap into like, oh, this guy is young, maybe he can give us a bit of a different angle. But at the same time, like, they just want to have you there. They don't really want to like take your suggestions. It's just like, I'm a little bit of like a mediator they can have to like make things feel more balanced. But basically, like, I was working as a consultant. I've been into fashion, since I was young, probably since 11 years old. I'm 19 now. And I kind of got into it just through like having all this spare time. I wasn't really the most social kid in middle school. And aside from getting into all sorts of different funny things on the internet, I got into clothes. I really got into clothes, and it came through sneakers. Like, I was really into Nike SBs and Jordans.
Were you a sneakerhead?
Yeah, I was a sneakerhead. I think Warren was maybe a bit of a sneakerhead too.
I might have been a sneakerhead back in my day too. Yeah, that's true.
Anyways, but from there, like, I just had all this time, and I would get really focused on it and just research and kind of entertain myself and learn about this thing that seems so odd and foreign to me. And I got really just into it, and I would want to go, look in thrift stores, go on eBay. And it was really my thing only at the time. This was like 2011 to 2012. And, other kids in school, they were either nerds or they were into sports. And I kind of had friends who were both of those, but I was never really as into the things they were into. So I was just like the odd one out. And it's ironic because, I would say a little bit of time passed, and all these kids they said, oh, like, I'm into Supreme now. I'm into all this stuff. And I think that was the beginning of this trend we've seen go forward, where somehow the majority of teenage boys, let's say, started their younger preteens, like the real Zoomers, they're all into fucking clothes. Like, that's the hottest consumer good. It's not as much about like kids are really into sneakers and Supreme, or, they get a little bit older and they're like, oh, I want to go on Grailed. I need to buy this rare Raf Simons, like, dirty old sweatshirt that goes for $2,000. So, Mom, can you give me your credit card? Like, and it's weird because this is so big and it's so hollow. Like, it's a very inauthentic phenomenon that's going on, versus like when I was younger, it was just the most like strange, like, little obsession I had, and it was just my thing. Like, I don't know, that's kind of how I feel about it. And I think there was definitely other kids that were into it, but it wasn't really a thing, and it was for, older people, or more so like a lot less straight kids or adults were into fashion, it felt like, at the time, just from the lens I was looking at it. And however you want to take that, but I definitely I was a bit of a nerd for it. Shit.
And did you want to talk about a bit how you got so most of our listeners are Twitter heads, and they don't actually traverse the Instagram world, although I think when this episode drops, we'll be getting a lot of Instagram people, but the podcast is mainly in the Twitter sphere. Do you think you could get into a little bit how you built up your Instagram empire and what got you kind of to the level of Mike the Ruler to really be ruling as you are now? I mean, you went from like an 11-year-old whiz kid savant of fashion, encyclopedia, like the Rain Man, but with fashion, and now you've turned it into a career for yourself. But how did that start in the beginning? How did you first become like Mike the Ruler?
There's a lot of tops and turns to this story, but like, basically, I would say I kind of had some personal things go on in my life, and I ended up in the troubled teen programs, let's say. So I I left. This was when I was in like 8th grade, so I was early into this stuff, but I ended up in this, boarding school that wasn't really a boarding school and was more of a prison. And
We've both been there.
mm-hmm. And that kind of pulled me away from everything I was into. So I didn't have any access to the internet. So I just kind of spent this year like fermenting and existing. And after that, I started high school. But in that year I was in boarding school, like I started to get some chances to go home, and on my chances to go home, this was 2013. I started. I don't really know how. I think it was this store V Files in New York that I was really into. That at the time was kind of like the epicenter of like this little thing that's gone totally fucking out of control. But it was this little thing there, and it was like. I can't even really put it into words, but like I met this kid, Luca Sabat, who's built quite a big following for himself. I mean, this expands outside of fashion. He's gone on to do a lot of successful things, but I met him at that store through, there was this girl who worked there who, kind of entertained me as this little weird kid that was interested in all of this. And, I met him, and then through him, I met my other friends like Austin, Ass Pizza, and others. And I started to feel like I met them, and they were into fashion, but we kind of bonded on a lot of other stuff. And this was like before Instagram was really what it is now. So there was no influencers, there was none of that sort of stuff, and we were kind of just like goofing off, they were a little bit older than me, and I was just kind of going about like building a little social group for myself. These were my first like friends outside of middle school, and they like we shared a lot in common, and we were all into other stuff like just goofy internet shit too. Like I'm sure a lot of the stuff that people who listen to this podcast have bonded over, just kids who spend a lot of time on the internet growing up,
extremely online kids.
Yep. So we just I made other friends through all of that, and shit, I gotta take it back a little. Like before I met them, I had started to post on Instagram. This was probably late 2012, and I would just post like clothes or just like random shit I liked. Like there was no agenda to it. There was no such thing as like influencers or any of that at the time that this happened. And I would just post this stuff and start to build like just people would find my page, like really small numbers of people. I mean, this is when people never had more than 500 followers on Instagram. And I would just post this stuff, and either people I had met just through like fucking being a weirdo, like going around talking to people as a kid in downtown New York, but like these people would find me, and it would just kind of, it just started to build, and I really didn't pay much attention to it, but I would say I probably got a few thousand followers at a certain point, and it was probably because like people had found my page and like interacted with me, and these were people that kind of at the time more Tumblr was the thing, so it was people who, I mean, some of these people are still around and very big, but at the time they were more kind of Tumblr famous, like adjacent to like both fashion and like kind of the beginning of like the rap scene that exists today. But like I interacted with these people. Also, I'm not sure if this is in the most chronological order, but New York Magazine, I mean, does that even exist anymore? It was like in all the newsstands, but it's like so far away from anything I pay attention to.
I don't know. That's like what we're gonna get into later. Is like the laundering of these like who consumes this
Print. Who
this
consumes
stuff.
print?
Yeah, and it still gets printed, but we'll get into that later. But New York Magazine.
Yeah, so they reached out to me. I think maybe they had reached out to my mom because I was like 12 or 13 at the time. But they were publishing a thing about internet fame. And like this was early in like 2014 or maybe even 2013, probably 2013. And they had featured me in this thing in the magazine, which was about like internet stardom. And it was focused mainly on Vine people because Vine was the biggest thing at the time in terms of like mass engagement. But for some reason they featured me, and I really was quite minor in comparison in terms of like following and stuff to these other people. But I was one of the main people they featured, and I guess that kind of defined like Instagram fashion, influencer in the current sense that exists, especially with like male people today.
Right.
And like from there, like, I mean, my following took off more, and we're like my friends and I, and some of these friends of mine have, stayed more with that sort of influencer thing, which I never honestly really got into, as funny as it is. But I remember I was like the first one who hit 10K, and I was like, damn, what the fuck? 10K is crazy. Because this was in spring of 2014, like 10K on Instagram, at least anyone I could have known. That's like a crazy number. And, so, but I never like, there's this attitude that people have now with Instagram and stuff where it's like everything is strategic. It's a whole game. Like they need to leverage themselves to get these corporate sponsorships, to get all this. None of that existed then. So it was like,
there was no tracking engagements and looking at like promoted posts or sponsored sales. None of that existed. Right.
No, I think Instagram DMs like started a few months after this. So it was really like, I never thought to capitalize it. It just kind of like, it took me aback, but like, I didn't know what to do. And some could say that's a mistake, but I'm honestly glad that like, I kind of didn't get too caught up in that and like was able to have some semblance of like a normal teenage development. And it's funny because shortly after this time, later that year, Warren and I met each other for the first time. But so yeah, all of this was going on, all this stuff started to happen. It was just that year, like things were building up a lot. Like I said, I didn't really have an awareness of what was going on. Maybe some of my friends were a little bit older and a little bit more socially maneuverable did, but I ended up later that year. It really, at the time I was like, this is wild, but then later that year somehow I ended up back in a fucking I ended up in a wilderness program at the end of right on New Year's of 2014. Actually, I got a cooned, as they call it, and sent to wilderness program later, place in Utah for a year and a half. But that's a totally bizarre thing that unfortunately happens to a lot of kids who
born and raised in New York City. That's just like the default parenting hood of like behavioral kids, is to the strategy is to just send them to the woods and let them fend for themselves and figure it out, and then they come out tougher on the other side, like I don't even know, Lord of the Flies even.
Yeah, except that's all a fake fucking scam, and it's all a structure so they can extend it for as long as possible and extract the most money from your parents and get you on as many pharmaceutical medications as possible. But that's a whole other story. Anyways, so later, I didn't get out of this place till spring of 2016, and while I was gone, all of this Instagram shit started to become something more serious, and like I was, I still had a following, and I wasn't like, I started posting again, and people were caring, and I was like friends with my friends that I was friends with before, and it was like, okay, I'm back. But I really didn't think deeply of it, and I kept all my interests. Like, I would say, if we want to take it back a little, like the first fashion I got into is when 2011, like I was already into sneakers through, honestly, it was like looking at the, like wanting to like be good at basketball and seeing what like the older kids who played basketball in my school would wear. And it would always be like, okay, these like the kind of shoes when you go in the sporting goods store that are like weirder looking and a bit more expensive. And I was like, oh, those shoes are cool. And maybe like, they sell you a dream, basically. That's kind of the ideal with a lot of garments and clothes and footwear and all sorts of consumer products, is that they want to sell you a dream. And unfortunately, the dream has been marketed to everybody, and the dream is less and less achievable. But like, as I was saying before, like I got into sneakers, and then my dad, like being kind of artsy, said, oh, let's go to the Met and see the Alexander McQueen exhibit, which was really popular at the time. And I went, and it kind of blew me away, because I was like, oh, like clothes can be this is fucking crazy. It tells a story. Like, I'd always been into like very dystopian and like close to apocalyptic science fiction novels and films and stuff. That was kind of my favorite subject matter as a kid. And I think this kind of channeled some of that through the storytelling he was able to showcase in his work, and it really caught me. And from there, I mean, I was into that, but I kind of quickly turned it into stuff that was more adjacent to what I wanted, So I got into, from the sneakers, I found out about like Rick Owens sneakers, and I was like, okay, these are really weird. And it's, a few months later, A$AP Rocky dropped his song where he mentioned Rick Owens, and then now we're at where we are now, where everyone knows what Rick Owens is. Before, you only knew about Rick Owens if you like lived in downtown New York and were like rich and like alternative and listened to bands like Coil and Current 93. But anyways, like, I think, yeah, so I got into Rick sneakers, I got into Rick clothes, and then at the time, like, this is 2011, 2012, the only clothes I could get, like, I had I was a kid, like, I never had more than $30, so I would go to thrift stores and stuff. In New York, there's luckily a lot of thrift stores, where some rich people who don't really have much value for material goods after they're done with them would donate stuff, and I would find sort of stuff. And one of the brands I would find a lot going to thrift stores was Helmut Lang. The design he designed up until 2005, when he kind of was kicked out or left his own company, and the company was sold and blah blah blah. You could say that's the beginning of this corporate weird late stage management of very directional fashion. But basically, like, I would find a lot of helmet stuff, so I got more into his stuff, and I would research what I could on the internet. With helmet stuff, like, it's weird because later, like, it blew up a lot, as did kind of everything. And I don't want to be like too much of a snob and be like, oh, I was into this first, but it was really weird to see all the things that I kind of liked and I didn't have anyone to talk to these things about because no one cared, really. So it was just like my hobby, and then all these things became so big, and like there's fucking, people have Discord groups where I don't use Discord. I've never been on Discord in my life, but people have Discord groups where they talk about this stuff. Like, it's so ingrained in like whatever the state of internet culture is today. And like, yeah.
So you built this like empire from age 11. You were mad young, and you built this Instagram empire that took off, and it was based off of you just being yourself, which is like one of the coolest things that you can do, like the most authentic things like possible. And you took that and you ran with it, but you didn't see any kind of like ego in it. You didn't have any, like, you were just being yourself, and people were attracted to that, and you gained this massive following off of being this like king of new style that they didn't know about. And you were able to kind of show people as a young kid what was like the new trend before A$AP Rocky dropped his song about Raph Simmons, Rick Owens.
I mean, I wasn't on Instagram then, but I was fucking reading countless forums and spending hours a day on eBay. But yeah, in some ways that's kind of what happened and how it went down. But I mean, with Instagram and stuff, it was, at first it was just about showing what I like, because like that's all I thought Instagram was for, like when it first started. But then it was like, okay, social media, you know, like you're active, you're extremely online, and you have a personality. So it would just be like me goofing off with my friends, and I would go on Instagram at 2 a.m. and post like a photo of a mod someone did of someone in Skyrim, so the guy had like a dick or something like that, and be like, oh, who's gonna see this at 3 a.m. and be like, what the fuck, you know? So it was never too serious, and it was never like, but that just, there was no agenda behind it. But I would say some sort of paradigm shift happened while I was, you know, in my little isolation in the good old Mormon
Utah
teen.
ethno state.
Yeah.
So Mike, I want
the Mormon country of Utah.
I want to know where you're going. So we got your past. I want to know where you're going in the future. What's Mike the Ruler like 2.0? What are you getting at? We see this this dying culture in New York City. It used to be inspired, and now it's directionless, it's sterile, it's uninspired. It's an Ouroboros of people chasing each other in a circle of clout chasing and following the same trends. And it seems like you want to pave the way for people to have an actual identity, and one that's an actual good one. So tell me about this and where you're going with what you want to turn yourself into from that past self that we just spent the last little bit talking about.
Yeah, so kind of where we left off, this was probably 2016. I met a friend of mine who was making clothes, and he was like painting on jean jackets and stuff, and that sounds so cliche now, but at the time there wasn't a million kids posting on Instagram, and your entire explore page wasn't like kids with airbrushed denim jackets and weird cut up sewn together stuff made from thrift store clothes. But it was quite cool what my friend was doing at the time, and I was like, okay, I want to see you make real clothes. So he moved operations out to LA. He had made, you know, a bit of money from what he was doing based out of Massachusetts, and he moved to LA. He started manufacturing his clothes there, and we were making more constructed, serious stuff where it was fully manufactured. And I was like, okay, let's start showing in Paris. I want to operate this like a real brand. So we were doing that, and we started showing in Paris, and he had built some connections for himself through what he was already doing, you know, some celebrity is wearing his stuff, or, you know, stores wanting to sell it. So we sold the collection. It did really well, and I got a lot of insight starting with that led me up to where I am now, you know, working on the business side of the real industry per se. But it's funny, like everything else, like how everyone wants to be an influencer, every kid who wanted to be an influencer also wanted to start a brand, and so many of these people even ended up in Paris with renting out a little showroom and trying to sell their stuff, and stores are carrying it because we're in a bubble right now, and it's the influencer bubble, and that bubble's popped, and we're on our way out of it. And it's funny because it's what's happened on social media and people marketing themselves as if they were a business is really similar to the .com bubble and the .com crash.
Yeah, I was just going to say it sounds exactly the same.
And what's happened with, let's say, the influencer crash is it was beginning to happen, and then the whole like beginning to happen slowly, but it was really clearly happening now. And the Corona thing has kind of just frozen everything. But I think that's just set it in stone. You know, culture is changing, especially online. And I think it's becoming more based on, you know, Instagram has kind of turned into Tumblr 2.0. It's just a visual like mood board. You just see stuff. It shows you stuff. You just look at stuff like, and that in a way has kind of decredited like the power of the influencer, which there's good and bad aspects to that. But from there, with everything going on and this whole rise and decline of this fake influencer culture, like nightlife and all of the scenes adjacent to that, and like creative stuff and music and everything has been so affected by it. And that's why you have like the entire scene in New York, like the entire, you know, party DJ scene in New York is like, you have all these people who are cool, but what's their personality? They're just doing stuff that's been done before. And it's funny because you have like, there's kind of two sets to it. There's like the straight people, and the straight people in it are really bland and like, but they're more palatable, you know, and they're just kind of like cool guy or pretty girl. Like you want to be like them. And they kind of survive off like just being they really have no personality. There's so many of these people, and like they survive off getting kind of corporate gigs and stuff to play like some brand, you know, big corporate brand wants to do a party in New York at China Chalet. So, you know, they book you to DJ. Or then you have just naturally through whatever circumstances, like more, you know, queer kind of nightlife that definitely has better music, but also has been tied up in like the millennial zeitgeist, and also just identity politics and like every side of that. So like it's all like all aspects of like, let's say, culture existing IRL in a natural place have kind of simmered down to like, you know, the pot stopped boiling. So, you know, something needs to happen.
So what do you see yourself as playing a role in this happening? What do you think? Do you think Mike the Ruler 2.0 can change from being the fashion encyclopedia whiz kid to being the person who can save this kind of uninspired legion of leagues of people that don't know really what's going on? They're uninspired. They don't have any direction, and it seems like you want to kind of give these people some kind of saving, like you're the second coming of Mike the Ruler, and you're going to save these people from their sins. And you can. I feel like you want to go into a direction that's like giving these people a chance to save themselves from this uninspired direction that they're going into, of repeating the same thing of, oh, I'm going to start a brand of distressed jeans or like watercolored jackets and whatnot.
I'm gonna be a DJ and I'm gonna play fucking the same music you hear on the radio, except, you know, I'm wearing clothes that this brand has lent me for free to wear for the night. Or I'm gonna be different, but what I'm doing to be different is just like fitting what you're expected to be different, instead of doing something actually like transgressive. And what ends up happening is like it's just dead. It's really dead. And, you know, I'm still into fashion, and I think long term, like, I see myself working in fashion and more the business side of fashion. But I love design and I love creating stuff, but I want to, you know, I have goals in my life that I want to achieve. So that's why I end up focusing on business sometimes. But like what goes on, I just feel like I can't do this myself. And there's by no means that I think I'm going to be like the sole savior. I mean, even if I was some like God figure, I don't think one of those God figures is powerful enough to fix things, because they're so fucked. But like, I think that I really want to pave a way for Gen Z kids, you know, that are getting to this age. You know, you have so many of these kids that move to these big cities. They see all this shit online. They're fed the same crap.
The Explore page is like a toxin getting injected. It's their IV drip. The Explore page of they're all the same shit, different brands of different graphic T-shirts and fucking God knows what, and they're all going in the same cycle.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's really Tumblr, but more powerful on a much larger scale, except dumbed down. And I'm not trying to play up Tumblr because Tumblr's dumb as fuck too, but there's definitely less diversity of thought than there was on Tumblr, at least diversity of taste. It's very like, it's as much going on as possible while being as surface level as possible. It's like these kids are into so much and do like present themselves in the most brash and like try hard way, but they're under like they can't even, it's like, oh, you like blah blah blah, name a song. It's that meme, but it's really that, because it's like these girls, I mean, like you have the whole e-girl trend and that style of like presenting yourself. And, a few years ago, this was like the most fringe thing on Tumblr to like put clown makeup on your face. But, now every girl in a suburb sees that on the Explore page, and with TikTok, and that's like, more accepted. I mean, that makes sense. But I think just in general, like Gen Z has so much power because they need to pave the next wave of like creative culture. But the problem that they have is that I don't think they've like really developed their own identity. And I'm worried that they're not going to be able to, because like growing up in this like controlled bubble of social media algorithms. But I really want to take this opportunity to kind of reset like this. I'm such an idealist, and kind of this dream I have right now is that this culture of nightlife, adjacent to this recession we've entered that could be, Great Depression 2.0. And with every economic downturn, certain opportunities are more apparent. Rich people that have all moved into New York City to live in Bushwick and work for some corporate company are going to move back to the suburbs. And, hopefully these delusional landlords will have some cheaper rent. So, young people that actually want to like, it's going to be more like a world you can kind of mold for yourself. And I don't think it's fully going to be that, because as Hulebeck, or however you say his name, said, Corona is just, it's going to be the same but worse. And I think he's probably right.
He is right.
But in the worst, there's some things that could be shown in a positive light, like getting a studio apartment for cheaper. So you're still living in a studio apartment, but it's cheaper and it's more accessible. So you can live in the studio apartment in the cool place and do something, So I hope that there's going to be opportunities for Gen Z to kind of create, their own little world and pave new culture. Because growing up, like everything, all my friends were older, like everything I looked at was kind of millennial. I was born in 2000, but all my culture was millennial. And although I still like the things I do, like I don't even want to see those things anymore. I'm so tired. And I really want to encourage my generation to push forward with their own exploits. And I really want to see the equivalent to what is good from the last generation, but on a better scale, because it's more newer, it's more refreshing. It questions the narrative a little bit and pushes something different. And I really want to encourage, especially, I'm from New York. I have many criticisms about New York City, but I do see myself being here for the foreseeable future. And I do want to live good, and I want to enjoy myself, and I want to see new things happen. So I really want to shape this, or at least try to influence the people I know and myself to push something new forward here. I really want that.
And with the following you have the ability to turn this brand that you have into something that is admirable. People look up to you, and as you said, kind of saving your generation which is such a powerful generation, the Zoomers, the Gen Zs, such a powerful generation that's going to take in the next role of power, and these people need to have some kind of direction. And I feel like you are able to give them the inspired direction that they need, rather than this uninspired, impotent, sterile, directionless way that they've been going down. And it's really admirable that you want to do that.
Thank you.
I want to take this time to get into, while talking about the directionless fashion scene of the old, rather than the new. We can talk about the uninspired leagues and legions of what's going on in the world of current corporate fashion in brick and mortar stores of Balenciaga that you see in these $1,200 hoodies from Vetements and from Balenciaga, same designers, same team, and creative directors. And what's your take on this? It seems like they have this ironic, how should I say this? They have this ironic twist on fashion, but it seems like they're taking the irony to heart. So it's almost unironic but ironic in the same way. And that's almost confusing, but I feel like you can spell it out for me.
It's irony and turning it into something sincere, but I think it's from a very different perspective, that myself or Warren or people I have more in common have. It's this irony from this kind of neoliberal, very European, older side of millennials. And it's to see this, it's this nihilism, but belief in the status quo and believing in playing with the systems that already exist. So you have, Vetements kind of, it was this project that I feel like started as something sincere and, but at the same time, I think there was a long-term goal. I think Demna, for those who don't know, Demna is the designer of Balenciaga, formerly the designer of Vetements, which is now headed by his brother who runs the business side of things. But he's kind of been the main superstar designer of fashion in the last decade almost. And although they've been around for a minute, I do think they're still every season, because things in fashion operate on that schedule. They're the most talked about, the most relevant, because they've captured this kind of zeitgeist of irony and this attitude of okay, things are burning, but let's just laugh at it, And as I said before, it's from a very different perspective than my own, but I think these two brands have kind of captured this mood that can transcend from the millennial to the Gen Z Zoomer. And
it turns these people into a kind of culture of following into the wrong path. I feel like it takes this irony of sincerity into what leads to irony poisoning, to where kids are actually poisoned by their irony and actually spending, some of them $1,200, and we'll get into this on how many of them are not, but how some of them are spending $1,200 on a hoodie that says some random phrase or something along those lines. It's become this false leverage of ability to sell the unsellable, and they sell them to stores and they sell them in these online marketplaces, but it turns into a radical kind of movement of irony poisoning, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and we'll get into the whole situation with product, because although it's connected, it's not the same zeitgeist or the same crisis, but it's what's going on with this, irony poisoning, as you put it, is that I think, as I mentioned before, fashion was to sell you a dream, but I think now, because everything else is selling you a dream and we're kind of living in a dream, people want to be sold like a medal, a little trophy that can say, haha, like, I made it this far. I'm here. I'm living in the present. I'm one of the people who gets it, And I'm not sure if that was the most clear analogy, but I think that with these brands, what they've done is they've made products that exist as a costume for people to wear. And when they're on Instagram, when they're showing themselves off to the world, it can be this costume that they can wear to say, listen, I'm one of the people who is aware and is playing in the game.
It's really nothing but a game, and this gets us into the false economy, which is kind of the crux of this episode that I am excited to talk about, because the people buying this, when I talked about how some people are buying the $1,200 hoodies, but many are not, it's a guise of getting these buyers, who are really the real victims, to get these products into stores and brick and mortar stores that actually have to pay to stock them, rather than an online retail store like an Amazon type situation where they're a broker of the clothes. And it messes up the entire institution of fashion and shopping in that sense. It destroys industries. Barney's is now bankrupt and closing. Closed. It's now closed. So Neiman Marcus just filed for bankruptcy. J. Crew, although not really in this sphere of clothing, it just filed for bankruptcy. And I'm sure there's going to be many others following along the way, because
most definitely
these buyers are tricked into this kind of laundering of clothing that isn't actually marketable at any reasonable price. So how can you sell these mass-produced items when there's no scarcity? There's no rarity, like when you talk about buying gold or something like that. There's a scarcity of value to it. There's no actual given scarcity or value to these clothing items. So how does this end up playing out for the false economy that props up itself upon laundering money around society in a infinite loop? What would you say about this?
So you could have a prime example is Vetements, and what they've done is, okay, Kanye wore a hoodie of theirs in 2015, and they took this opportunity and they say, okay, we're going to sell into this. And they started, creating a more consumer focused, but not really, like, just basically like selling these stores a dream and a world. And the stores wanted to buy it because it was talked about all the time. This is the beginning of the trend of super oversized hoodies that, now is the norm of most sweatshirts that you buy. If you're some teenager that lives in Kansas going to the mall and going to H&M, that's the style they make and whatnot. But, the brand capitalizes on this, and they sell to more stores, and more stores indefinitely. Like, there's just so many of these stores. So many of them are just like, some sheik's wife that wants to open or a retail store because she likes fashion, or it's like some big corporate company going off flawed like consumer data, thinking that they're selling into the next big thing and whatnot. And they buy the product, and the brand wholesales them the product, and they buy the product. The hype moves away from the brand. The brand finds a way to keep selling, stores. There's always another sucker to play. And what happens is, they create all this product, and there's no one buying it. You can go on all these sites throughout the season. The product is in, full size run. Nothing's out of stock. It will be 70% off, and sometimes be the same quantity. Like nothing is selling it. It's not worth more than its intrinsic value, you know? And what ends up happening is they still keep things going. And, you know, the average person, they would see this and be like, what the fuck? But really how it works is the brands can leverage all they need is the lowest common denominator of person to wear it, you know, and they get the person to wear it. You know, the person could have bought it off someone who stole it, you know, who knows, but it's anyone can buy it and it in whatever circumstance, and they wear it and they post a picture on Instagram, and 1,000 people post a picture on Instagram. 500 of those people could be wearing a counterfeit. Like, who knows? Like, but then the brand can leverage themselves to investors to say, look, we have all this engagement. Or they can leverage themselves to stores and say, look, we have all these people buying our stuff. And it's the influencer bubbles influence into fashion, which has turned it into an industry that is very similar to some of the tribulations of what's gone wrong in the stock market or in other industries that have existed in such a bubble.
Yeah, and so we can move into a conversation about that bubble. So this realization first happened with me. I told you, Mike, this separately before the podcast, and that's how we kind of came upon this subject. Was I was just in a deli, or some would call it a smoke shop or a corner store, whatever you call it, the magazine stores, and you see these piles and piles of magazines. And I wonder one day, who's going to buy any of this? And not only that, but no one's going to buy 1/8 of this, and it's going to continue to be restocked every month. What is bringing in the money for this? Is this smoke shop just a laundering system for these items? What is bringing in any revenue? It seems like pure money laundering. And what is so compatible with other industries is, and the most being real estate, is these high-rise buildings that are getting put up by the day. And you see Central Park Tower, 432 Park, these new skyrises with the $90 million apartments. And who's inhabiting them? No one. They're half empty, more than 2/3 empty. And the people who own the apartments, they're all sold out. And the people who own them are like Chinese diplomats and Saudi sheiks and people with billions and billions of dollars in their capital, and they're using this as an investment vehicle. And all this does is launders the money around in the same way that it does with fashion, in the same ways that it does with magazines and magazine stores. It's all being laundered around in this economy. And so that would equate the economy to being a false economy. It's propped up on a giant bubble of falsehood, which is just blatantly insane to me, but we're all living in it, and there's nothing we can do about it, it seems. Mike, what do you think about this?
It's the exchange of debt. It's really basically one person who finds, not just one person, but it's everyone is out there to hustle, and they're just trying to, it's like a casino, and they're trying to play it in their favor. And I've heard people talk about, you know, I'm not the most educated on the stock market, but some people have said, oh, you know, they've turned Wall Street into the biggest casino in the world. And you can relate that to some of this, where it's this long-term Ponzi scheme where you basically, it's the trading of debt, and you have like, you know, the brands can continue to fuck over these stores. You know, the stores will probably find a way to break even. You know, they can sell the product at wholesale price, what they paid, even though all the time's been wasted. They sell it at wholesale price, maybe, you know, to a liquidator, an off-price discount store, you know, and then they maybe try and sell it. But the brands only pay the cost of production, which is so minimal, even in comparison to the wholesale price they sell the products for. And what happens here is, instead of running the business, okay, they want to make money, but they also want to sell a product that there's a demand for to someone who's going to use it and appreciate it. That was the way it was at one point, I would think. And what happens instead is, they sell the product and they run the business only as a vehicle to either, sell it's a long game to build the company as the product itself, ignoring all the other factors around it, all the impact it leaves, everything, just as the company is a product. All the work, everything, all the products they've made is just one big product they can sell to some firm, or they can run the business continually to take in investor money. It's just a big fake scheme. And I'm sure a lot of these other industries and a lot of other things which show a lot of similar qualities, such as, real estate or print, just any product that's in this state, which honestly, the way things are, I wouldn't be surprised if there's cases of this in every single kind of product. Every industry, is like this.
And that's what Marx talks about, is the kind of the death of capitalism is where the overproduction of means comes to, and where the overcoming of means, or the overproduction of means, comes to an end and doesn't make sense anymore. And that brings along communism. Where Marx is right is he's talking about these, if you could imagine these machines or factories that print out an infinite supply of overvalued items. This is exactly what we're living in. And this is totally a scheme economy where the middle class is living in what Steve Bannon would say is neo-feudalism, where we are the serfs, and the higher class with the $90 million apartments in the half-vacant buildings that they own. It's one of their 10 properties as an investment vehicle. They're uninhabited, just as these clothes and fashion are uninhabited by bodies. The apartments are uninhabited by bodies, and these fashion items are uninhabited by bodies.
You're preaching to the choir, Warren. Honestly, I think it's a very accurate analysis. And I think what's going on is that, industry exists not to fulfill the premise of why it exists. Like, fashion exists not to produce clothes for people who have a disposable income and want to buy cool things to wear, but it exists as a tool for, the people who are playing the game to scrape off profits. And it's just everything is a game. Everything is just a mechanism used for, it exists for such opposite reasons as to why the average, consumer thinks it would exist.
This is exactly what Marx talks about bringing capitalism to its end. And so maybe we're at that point where capitalism comes to its end, where neo-feudalism comes to arise, and clothing, as an example of one of these pieces of industry, is left oversupplied and underdemanded. And these prices don't change. The buyers keep buying, and the businesses go out of business. I don't know how this economy is going to go any further by going along a false sense of capital. It's seemingly impossible. The debt gets left by trails of bird shit along the way as it flies along the sky. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know how this happens.
It's so easy for some people to shake off debt. Meanwhile, the average idiot, is stuck in debt for their whole life. I mean, what you said once again is very, very, very true and very unsettling. And I think we are living in a bit of a bubble ourselves, both being New Yorkers. I think we see these things firsthand in our little cosmopolitan, somewhat bougie existence. But what happens from there is obviously we're seeing the thing most firsthand. Maybe the average person who shops at the average store and does not even pay attention to what's going on in designer clothes and does not live near a smoke shop that sells weird artsy magazines and does not live near vacant, overpriced apartment buildings would not be affected by any of this. But, it works its way down and it expands and it continues. And, you wonder sorry.
Well, no, I assume you have, but have you seen Blade Runner, Mike?
Of course I've seen Blade Runner.
And the Tyrell Corporation and these giant megastructures of buildings that they have of humongous buildings and structures that the elites are living in while everyone else is on the surface level in the rain and kind of depth groveling around on the earth and living in there. It's a complete analogy to these apartment buildings like 432 Park and Central Park Tower that are inhabited by the ultra-rich elite, are left half empty because they're investment vehicles for fraud or laundering, and people are left in the studio brownstones that rent keeps rising up upon because they're surrounded by growing megastructures, and it's a completely devastating effect that it has on the economy and that it has on people's lives. People can't afford to live in a city eventually that continues to grow as it is growing today.
I mean, you look at the economy and you look at the day-to-day life of the average person, and there's way before Corona popped off, the economy, as Trump says, GDP, from a statistical standpoint, it was looking better than ever. But I mean, if you look at the reality for millions of Americans, it's so far from that, because given that business and industry is a fake game which we cannot play in, it does not reflect the actual economy of, the average American. And I think seeing this through my little altered lens of my specific interests and my location and the people I interact with has almost given me a little bit of a head start to see some insight, I feel like. And I wonder if maybe, reading deeply and paying attention to the state of retail would be a wake-up call for many people who are very unaware of the dire circumstances we are ever rapidly entering. These big... Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Well, my question for you is, I guess, going back to fashion, is with the stores being the advertisers of the product, of the capital, it's indicative of a society that's falsely propped up. And I don't know how they can last much longer, and they aren't lasting any longer. As we talked about, Barney's is out of business. Neiman Marcus.
Before coronavirus, Barney's was gone, and these other companies were destined for the same fate. But what's happened right now has just sped it up a little bit. They could weasel their way out of it, play up certain things and drag it on longer. But the lockdown, maybe one of the few upsides, is that it's kind of cleared out these dinosaurs that have just been rotting away in their flesh sitting there. But, you look at this and some may end up like Barney's, while others will go bankrupt and come back exactly the same, because, it's just going to be consolidation of power and wealth as it always is.
Do you have any ideas of Amazon? And we did an episode about how corporate bailouts are usually by the government, and this next session of corporate bailouts is going to be by the corporations themselves, the mega corporations, similar again to Blade Runner. And these mega corporations such as Amazon or Disney are going to buy out companies like Neiman Marcus and bail them out of bankruptcy, because the government isn't going to. The government doesn't care about Neiman Marcus, but Amazon might. Amazon might want to have a a stock in the fashion industry and go into high fashion. They
already
leveraged
have.
themselves.
I mean, it's so funny you're saying this, and I have such a grin on my face as you were just talking, because
I saw
Amazon just announced today that they're gonna bail out all these American designer fashion brands that have been impacted by coronavirus. And it's so funny. It's like, anyone could have predicted this, and Amazon just has all the capital. They can do what they can, run it at a loss indefinitely until it just generates $1, and then it's worthwhile for them because they have all this revenue from these other things that they have the power to do that.
And that's how they started their company. They started their company at a loss, and it took them years and years until they were beginning to get a profit. And that's I'm reading 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, and that's exactly what he talks about on monopolies, is you want to generate your company to be at a point of generating not revenue but loss in the beginning, and to accumulate monopoly power to grow to the point where you can swallow up entire companies as a whole and turn them into insane conglomerations. And I cannot believe that you just said that, because I did not even know that, but we talked about it on our last podcast. So shout out to Eric, because he was the one who predicted this for me without any knowledge of this fashion world. And that's actually incredible. I cannot believe that it's actually come true. Or I can believe that it's actually come true. It's pretty insane. But it's destined to happen. This is how megacorps start, and this is how World War Terminus in Blade Runner or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep started, where Disney and Amazon end up as the patchwork mold bug megacorps and start nuking each other, and Amazon nukes Disney World, and and then they retaliate. It's the start of Blade Runner 2049. I feel like we're on trajectory for 2049 to be the time to have this all happening.
I honestly love this because, as I said before, dystopian science fiction was possibly like my favorite, like absolute favorite genre of anything. Like everything had to have that vibe for me when I was younger. That's what caught my interest the hardest. And in a way, we're living the movies. We're living in my life a movie. We're living in a movie. So maybe there's something to enjoy in this unfortunate series of events.
Well, if we're living in the movie, I hope that we end up in the Tyrell Corporation and not as the Depth Groveler Blade Runner androids that are sent on the bottom streets, the bottom layer of society, to take on these replicants. And I guess the replicants would be the Instagram explore pagers who are literally replicants and replicate the same old fashion in a continuous cycle, and need someone like Mike the Ruler 2.0 to take them out of this loop and to give them a direction into something inspired.
Think about like the kids who are born, in like 2008 or 2010 and growing up with fully immersed in this system that is developed in our lifetimes. And although we're quite young, I think it's even more interesting to see the people younger than us, younger than Gen Z, Generation Alpha, as they put them, because these will maybe be the true replicants, but at least they'll have cyborg hookers to keep them at bay.
That's right. I think that's a good point to wrap it up on. And we actually just hit bar 2049 on our recording software, so the synchronicity is real. And I think that maybe culture isn't downstream from reality, but reality is downstream from culture, and that Blade Runner has been prophetic in this entire industry of fashion to real estate to your corner store deli and your magazines that you're not reading because no one's buying them, even though they're going to be printed every month en masse. And, Mike, thank you so much for coming on TekWars 2.0. This was a great conversation, and it was a pleasure to have you and to hear the new Mike the Ruler.
Most definitely. Thank you for having me, and welcome to the future.